At 88, Jacques Charrier, once French cinema's icon of virility and the only man to lead Brigitte Bardot down the aisle, finally breaks a decades-long silence. Though his name has faded from memory, who could have suspected that beneath this glamorous actor's facade lay such enduring pain? His revelations today transcend mere nostalgia. This is a heart-wrenching confession, an indictment of the star system's illusions, and an ultimate quest for redemption. His life remains forever bound to Brigitte Bardot, the century's most famous Frenchwoman, by a blazing love and a family tragedy that shook the entire nation. Imagine 1950s France. Unprecedented cultural ferment electrifying the country. The new wave sweeps aside cinematic conventions with lightweight cameras and boundary-breaking stories. From this creative crucible emerges a young leading man with singular charm, Jacques Charrier. Unlike the flamboyant stars of his era, he embodies a discreet, almost melancholic elegance. His intense gaze and mysterious aura attract directors craving authenticity. Yet it wouldn't be a role that sealed his fate, but an explosive encounter. Brigitte Bardot, just 25, is already a global phenomenon. After Roger Vadim's And God Created Woman, made by her ex-husband, she embodies sexual liberation and untamed femininity. Paparazzi stalk her, women mimic her winged eyeliner, men hoard her swimsuit photos. But behind this living myth hides a woman exhausted by the spotlight, yearning for sanctuary. On the set of Babette Goes to War, a whimsical World War II comedy, the spark ignites. Bardot, the film's undisputed star, immediately notices this unknown young actor. Amid habitual charmers like Sacha Distillar, a flamboyant musician and womanizer, Jacques stands apart. He reads Rilke between takes, discusses painting with crew members, shuns parties. He had this aura of calm amid chaos, a script supervisor would recall, as if he already carried the world's sorrow. Overruling producers who deemed Charrier too green, Bardot insists with her trademark resolve, "It's him or no one." Her clout then was such that studios capitulated. Overnight, this unassuming man is thrust into the limelight. Journalists scramble for anecdotes about the mysterious stranger who tamed France's BB. Their on-screen chemistry soon becomes reality. Jacques embodies the antithesis of Bardot's past lovers. Where Vadim staged her as an object of desire, Charrier listens to her doubts. While Distillar swept her into wild nights, Jacques offers horseback rides through Rambouillet Forest. "With him, I thought I'd found normality," she confessed years later. Their 1959 wedding triggers unprecedented media hysteria. Hundreds of photographers besiege Paris's 16th arrondissement town hall. Newsreels broadcast the couple waving through cheers. Yet behind official smiles, Jacques already shows unease. Dreaming of demanding roles, he's typecast as the brooding heartthrob. Critics dub him Mr. Bardot, mocking his meteoric rise. The worst awaits. Their private life becomes tabloid prey. One lunch in Saint-Tropez, a paparazzi crawls from under their table. Jacques, naturally reserved, develops a phobia of cameras. "Each snapshot stole a piece of my soul," he admitted. Bardot, hardened by fame since adolescence, can't grasp his anguish. The first crack in their idol. Meanwhile, French cinema evolves. As Godard and Truffaut revolutionize film, Jacques remains trapped in frothy comedies. Critics attack his theatrical style, his refusal to adapt. The actor spirals into self-destruction. Drunken evenings replace passionate debates on Italian neorealism. Bardot soars ever higher. Their love tilts off balance. Ever self-possessed, Jacques Charrier never courted fame. Celebrity was merely the price paid to love France's most desired woman. Professionally, Babette opened unexpected doors. Through the 60s and 70s, he juggled film and stage roles, methodically building a reputation as a serious, exacting actor. Though his star never regained its initial blaze, he earned peers' respect by choosing projects for depth over headlines. Few knew that behind the Bardot's husband label lay a complete artist. A passionate painter, erudite scholar of classical theater, then a devoted father to children from later marriages. After their 1962 divorce, he abandoned glamorous cinema for the sanctuary of his canvases. brushstrokes replaced paparazzi flashes. The muted hues of his studio slowly eclipsed the harsh lights of film sets. His discreetly exhibited works wove the fabric of a second artistic life, far from the storm. Yet, in the collective imagination, Jacques Charrier remains that melancholic-eyed leading man who dared marry the untouchable Brigitte Bardot. Few remember the man who weathered media hell with silent dignity. The sensational custody battles over his son, Nicholas, scrutinized like a soap opera, the vicious rumors peddled by tabloids. He never sank into public vendettas, choosing restraint over the clamor of controversy. At 88, the artist now lives far from the spotlight. When he finally broke his decades-long silence, it wasn't to rekindle old dramas but to redefine his place in history. No longer a mere footnote to the Bardot legend, but a man who chose inner truth over star system compromises. His true legacy, a life where art triumphed over appearances, fatherhood weathered storms, and dignity prevailed over tabloid frenzy. This quiet strength had already revealed itself that June day in 1959 at Louveciennes. As over 150 journalists transformed the tranquil town hall into a besieged zone, Jacques waited impassively for the woman who would upend his existence. Photographers climbed trees, reporters disguised as nuns breached barricades. The chaos reached surreal heights. When Bardot appeared in her pink and white Vichy dress, it wasn't a radiant bride's glow but the tense gait of an icon sacrificing herself to her own myth. Her hesitant smile and measured gestures betrayed a woman aware she was staging her most intimate moment for spectacle. This mythical wedding sealed more than a love union. It embodied the clash between reality and collective fantasy. Jacques walked toward the altar with the silent certainty of one who knew he'd share his wife with millions of strangers. Few imagined this unassuming young actor would, decades later, deliver life's finest performance, choosing canvas over glitter, introspection over revenge, and finally, after long silence, reclaiming his story with undimmed elegance. Beside her, Jacques kept his eyes open, even in the intoxication of their media-saturated love. He harbored no illusions. Marrying Brigitte Bardot meant binding his life to more than a woman. He was wedding a living myth, a storm of flashbulbs and collective fantasy. Years later, his voice would crack recalling that era. I naively believed love could shape destinies. I hadn't understood I'd embraced a legend, not just a beating heart. Yet back then, his hope shone as solid as their wedding bands. He dreamed of a haven beyond the spotlight where their love could ripen unseen. When Brigitte became pregnant with their son Nicholas, Jacques thought he'd touched miracle. Having grown up in a hushed bourgeois family, he saw a chance to give Bardot what she'd never had: roots. He envisioned a child's laughter bridging two solitudes, building a bulwark against gala superficiality. Fatherhood felt like grace, he'd confess. He pictured ordinary mornings, conspiratorial whispers by the crib, the simple alchemy turning two individuals into a living sanctuary. But for Brigitte, her swelling belly became a prison of flesh. Pregnancy awakened vertigos deeper than first trimester nausea. How to reconcile the image of the free, provocative goddess who'd electrified screens in and God-created woman with this motherly role clinging to her like an ill-fitting costume. In her memoirs, the actress wrote bluntly of visceral revulsion. I felt this life growing inside me like a threat. The child was a stranger, an intruder warping my body and dreams. Her nights filled with nightmares of giving birth under photographers' flashes. The baby held aloft like a trophy by anonymous hands. Every word of Brigitte's anguish gouged Jacques' soul. That she could reject our child before even meeting his gaze. He murmured years later, the wound still raw. His house of cards collapsed. The woman who dazzled him in a red bikini on Saint-Tropez shore now morphed into a receding shadow. Their marriage bed became a silent battleground where Brigitte, consumed by inner conflict, curled inward. Jacques tried reaching through the fog, a hand on her shoulder, soothing words whispered in darkness. But the closer he drew, the further she retreated into an invisible fortress. The world kept swooning. Magazines celebrated the century's most glamorous couple, blind to the cracks. When they smiled hand in hand at charity events, none guessed their interlaced fingers held no warmth. "We were performing a play whose script we'd forgotten," Jacques admitted. Behind their villa's closed doors, silences thickened. Conversations circled inevitably around the coming child, wanted by one, dreaded by the other. In January 1960, when Nicolas Jacques Charrier came into the world, his birth unfolded without the traditional tears of joy. The chic Neuilly clinic saw lavish flowers parade through its halls, yet none grazed Brigitte's glacial heart. As Jacques cradled their son with awed tenderness, the actress averted her eyes, as if this tiny being embodied all her contradictions. Motherhood felt like a betrayal of herself, of that fiercely constructed image of the independent woman she'd so meticulously crafted. What should have sealed their family became its poison. Brigitte, crushed by the weight of fame and haunted by the specter of domesticity, retreated into work. Every photo shoot, every film set became an escape hatch, leaving Jacques alone with bottles and sleepless nights. Their marriage now resembled those cinematic sets, a majestic facade hiding empty backstages. The child would grow between two worlds, a father's shattered dream and a mother's painful refusal to embrace an iconhood she never sought. The icy universe Brigitte Bardot offered stood in stark contrast to Jacques Charrier's deepest dream, building a family rooted in unconditional love, daily stability, and reassuring presence. While the mythic actress lived by the rhythm of spotlights and film shoots, Jacques saw in Nicolas far more than a son. This child represented a fragile soul to protect at all costs from the world's indifference and the calculated coldness of a mother more preoccupied with her career than her own flesh and blood. "I didn't want him to grow up feeling like a mistake," the father would confess years later, a gravelly emotion in his voice. "Above all, I never wanted him to doubt for a second the love he deserved." This silent promise became the bedrock of his existence. In 1963, when their divorce was finalized, the court granted Jacques sole custody of Nicolas, a rare verdict for an era when fathers seldom received such privilege. The raw truth behind this decision laid bare Brigitte Bardot's utter absence from her son's life. Visits could be counted on one hand. Attempts to forge a maternal bond were virtually non-existent. Occasional glittering gifts sent from afar, letters penned in bureaucratic tones. These gestures resembled a clumsy attempt to soothe a guilty conscience more than genuine affection. Confronted by this emotional void, Jacques made the most radical choice possible for a rising actor. He turned his back on his promising career. Tempting roles, Hollywood premieres, public acclaim. All were sacrificed at the altar of a far more precious mission. "Fame can wait," he once confided to a close friend. "My son's childhood won't." While the Bardot myth blazed through media like wildfire, Jacques built, stone by stone, an invisible yet indestructible legacy. Shared breakfasts, supervised homework, healing hugs after nightmares. Yet the cruelest wound came over 3 decades later, in 1996, when Brigitte Bardot published her memoir under the provocative title initials BB. In a chilling passage, she labeled Nicolas' birth a horrific mistake and the worst nightmare of my life. Words that fell like knives on Jacques' heart. For Nicolas, now an adult, this brutally confirmed a lifelong undercurrent of maternal rejection. How does one recover from such a public declaration? Jacques smothered his anger in dignified silence. No scathing retorts in magazines, no televised showdowns. Only a silent pain shared privately. "I screamed inside, not for myself, but for him." For every second he had to face that vile truth. Years spent building a fortress of paternal love reduced to ashes by a few lethal sentences. Still, the aging actor refused to turn his son into a spectacle. "Dignity," he murmured to a confidant, "is the last gift I can give my child, even when the whole world tries to tear it from us." Today, when Jacques Charrier's story resurfaces, it isn't the clamor of divorce or Bardot's cutting words that linger. No, what endures is the image of an ordinary man who became a hero through absolute constancy. A father's love that withstood media storms, abandonment, and celebrities' cheap shots. In show business's often cynical landscape, Jacques embodied a simple, revolutionary truth. Sometimes the greatest roles aren't played on screens, but in the stubborn intimacy of a life devoted to sheltering one's light. Jacques Charrier, the man who chose bedtime stories over Hollywood scripts, impromptu soccer matches in the garden over glittering galas. The one who taught his son an essential truth. Being desired by crowds doesn't always mean being loved for who you truly are. But with courage, one might reconcile these two forces. His legacy lives not in yellowed film reels or forgotten theater posters, but in every decision made for the boy who arrived beneath a weight of unspoken words, in every withheld remark to preserve his peace. The silent artist, indeed. After the collapse of his marriage, Jacques continued his acting career for a time, moving from one film shoot to another throughout the 1960s. But a muffled metamorphosis was taking place within him. Roles, even those crafted by the greatest screenwriters, no longer captivated his soul. The spotlights that once shone like promised stars now felt like prison bars. Every film set echoed painfully with what he had lost. His appearances grew sparse. His name gently faded from credits as though erased by a discreet hand. Seeking creative renewal, he ventured behind the camera by co-founding a production company with a childhood friend. The idea? To shape narratives rather than embody them. Alas, the enterprise quickly faltered, weighed down by debts and artistic disagreements. The professional failure struck like a sledgehammer blow, awakening a far deeper weariness. For the first time, Jacques became aware of the burden of an existence forever defined by others. The actor, Bardot's ex-husband, the father of a scrutinized child. It was in the silence following these disappointments that a radical decision blossomed, to reconnect with his first passion, the one that had animated him long before the studios. Painting. What a striking contrast to cinematic ovations and critiques. Here, there was no instant gratification, only the slow, demanding dialogue between brush and canvas. A naked truth, unadorned. At nearly 40, he returned to the benches of Paris's École des Beaux-Arts, anonymous among students who knew nothing of his star-studded past. Can you picture the scene? This focused 40-year-old mixing pigments while youths nearby debated Goddard, unaware he'd once shared billing with Belmondo. But Jacques didn't care. For the first time in years, he wasn't playing a role. The canvas became his intimate confessor. His style violently clashed with the Technicolor cinema of the 1960s. His paintings were landscapes of the soul. Deep grays, burnt ochres, blurred silhouettes drowned in chiaroscuro. Each brushstroke was an archaeological dive into his own buried layers. The sorrow of divorce, tenderness for his son, a phoenix's resilience, all flowed forth. These were not the works of a man thirsting for glory, but of an identity seeker determined to exist beyond others' gazes. Gradually, his canvases traveled. First, discreet exhibitions in Montparnasse, then Switzerland, even reaching Tokyo where a gallery owner captivated by his melancholic palette mounted a show. Recognition arrived, quiet but real. Critics began referencing the Charrier of canvases, without invariably mentioning Bardot. One day, at an opening in Lyon, a local journalist asked about this rebirth. His liberating reply came swiftly. I no longer need others to define me. Painting is my breath. At last I am. For decades, Jacques had been the gilded prisoner of his own legends. The explosive leading man, the husband of the world's most beautiful woman. But time, that impartial sculptor, granted him an unexpected grace. Media oblivion. Far from camera flashes, he learned to patiently rebuild his identity. Brick by brick, painting by painting. After the divorce, this quest for stability even took an unforeseen form. This new chapter opened with his marriage to France Louis Dreyfus, scion of the illustrious namesake dynasty, a pillar of international trade and French finance since the 19th century. This union, far more than a simple marriage, connected him to a discreet, almost aristocratic network of influence where candlelit dinners mingled with boardroom counsel. France offered him an anchor in a structured world, distant from paparazzi flashes. Together, they raised 2 daughters in the velvet cocoon of their family mansion, where children's laughter echoed through marble staircases. For a few years, Jacques savored a tranquility he'd believed impossible after the media storms of his first marriage. Yet destiny reshuffled the cards once more. Another encounter led to a third marriage and the birth of his 4th child, a daughter embodying hopes of rediscovered balance. For children now, two sons inheriting his tumultuous youth, two daughters symbolizing his successive rebirths. Each incarnated an era, a different facet of Jacques, the passionate artist, the wounded father, the man desperately seeking harbor. But total serenity, the kind that touches the soul beyond appearances, arrived on an unexpected breeze. Makiko, a Japanese photographer with eloquent silences, crossed his path at a Kyoto exhibition. Rooted in a culture celebrating transience, she knew nothing of Paris match covers or 1960s gossip. To her, Jacques was neither a legendary ex-husband nor a relic of French cinema, but a creator with melancholic eyes, capturing Breton light or the shadow of a memory. Their conversations, first nourished by a shared love of watercolors and black and white photography, gradually revealed a rare alchemy. She taught him to see beauty in crevices, a wave retreating on sand, a dead leaf resting on a windowsill. In 2009, they joined their lives in the absolute intimacy of a village hall, far from voracious lenses. No fanfare, just the rustle of oak trees and the complicit smiles of two witnesses. Saint Briac-sur-Mer became their sanctuary. This village of granite and holly, clinging to the Breton cliffs, offered Jacques a return to his roots, both literal and metaphorical. Each morning, he traversed the coastal paths, the salt-laden wind lashing at his virgin canvases tucked under his arm. In his sun-flooded studio, he conversed with the ghosts of the past through brushstrokes, now furious, now soothing. Makiko kept watch, discreet, developing her own negatives in the adjoining room. A ballet of two artists attuned to each other without needing words. She gave me a present unburdened by memory, he confessed many years later, recalling this rebirth. Here, no one demands I speak of Brigitte or justify my choices. Yet on the cusp of his 80th spring, Jacques felt compelled to exhume his truths, not out of bitterness, but to outline his own legacy himself. In a poignant interview with Le Figaro, he lifted the veil on Nicholas's tragedy. Brigitte never truly wanted that child. I had to fight like a wild beast for him to have a place in her life and in mine. His message to Bardot, charged with raw emotion, resonates like a farewell. I hope you've found your peace. Just know this, a child does not live on bread alone. I poured all my heart into the one we created. That is my victory. And you, do you think Jacques, after this long winding path, has finally laid down the burden of his Bardot years? Can Brittany, its sea spray, and Makiko's quiet love heal such ancient wounds? Share your thoughts. Every story deserves to be heard, especially those written in the ink of the soul.